Cindy Woolley from C2 Communications.
Hello, everybody.
Cheers.
Cheers. Are you staying warm, Cindy?
It's a bit chilly, so I'm drinking my hot tea.
Really?
But it's going to keep the vampires at bay because I took a little fangirl trip to see where Vampire Diaries is filmed and picked up some verbane tea. I don't know. It's delicious.
You go all the way to Atlanta, my hometown, and the only thing you do, all the restaurant suggestions I give you, you pass everything by to go to Covington to check out the Vampire Diaries haunt.
I know, it's the cultural elite, right? I had ballet, I had, YAGP with my daughter and vampires. That's the way I roll.
I am so happy for you. Well, we're excited about our guest today on PRosé. His name is Joe Byerly. He's an active duty armor officer in the Army who has served in both conventional military and joint assignments. He is the founder of the Green Notebook, which is a website. That's how it started. It's a blog, it's a podcast. He does it all. It's focused on military leadership and professional development. He is a co-founding member of the Military Writers Guild, and his book is My Green Notebook, Know Thyself Before Changing Jobs. And he loves to read and to journal. He's a man after our own heart, right? So let's welcome him.
Absolutely.
Hey, Joe.
Hey, cheers, Vicky, Cindy. How are you doing?
So good to see you.
It's great. It's great to talk with you.
Now, I understand you're traveling a bit for your day job.
I am, yes.
Yeah, but thank you for making time for us, and my cat is making more time for us today. So
Yeah, matter of fact, I can talk about whatever you want to talk about. I'm currently in a Holiday Inn. So like that just, I slept in a Holiday Inn Express last night, so I could basically just talk about whatever today. This is going to be awesome.
Brilliant.
How is the leadership skills at the Holiday Inn?
It's great. It's awesome.
Okay.
Well,
and what are you drinking? Coffee this morning or this afternoon or this evening or whatever time frame you happen to be in?
I'm drinking coffee. I'm drinking Alpha Coffee, which is they're based out of Salt Lake City, Utah, and it's my favorite type of coffee.
Alpha Coffee, that must be a military brand.
It is. It's a retired military officer and his wife just decided to do something completely different, and now they travel the world finding awesome beans and make coffee, and so it's really cool.
What a terrific second career.
Yeah, I know. It's I think that's awesome when people can do something for so long, and then just completely shift gears and do something different. Like, I don't know, like host a morning talk show in Atlanta, and then now do that if I was just throwing things out there.
Joe's having his own fanboy experience here.
Well, let's talk about everything, the website, the blog, the podcast, and downloading your manual. Cindy is very excited. I haven't done so yet. Why should everybody be part of the Green Notebook?
Yeah, so just a quick backstory is in the military, you get issued a hardbound green notebook. And that's what we use for taking notes in meetings. As we're doing operations, writing our thoughts down, we have a process called the after action review, which is if we go on a mission, we do training, we come back, and we work through all of that. And so we write those things down in our notebook. So it's this idea of writing things down. I have a quote that I open my podcast with. It's from Ian Forster, and I love it. It's, "How do I know what I think until I see what I say?" And so it's this idea that we have thousands of thoughts just swirling through our mind each day, and like they come in and then they go out, and some of them are brilliant, some of them maybe not so much. But the idea of writing this stuff down so you can go back, you can read it and review it. So that's where the website originally came from, was My Green Notebook. And the website's called From the Green Notebook, and it was My Green Notebook, writing my thoughts down there, sharing like little leadership tidbits on the blog. And then eventually it grew over time to friends asking me, hey, I have an idea for a blog post. Could I put it on your blog? And then now it's grown. So I started it in 2013, and it's now, I think, like 3.4 million views. It's popular in militaries all over the world. Every military has a form of a green notebook that they give their military leaders, and so it's been awesome. So now the blog is even run by a team of active duty volunteers who continue to edit and help people get their ideas up. And then for me, I focus on doing the podcast. We shoot out a couple newsletters, a weekly one and a monthly one, and then doing these book concepts. So you asked why. I just told a really long backstory. I'm sorry, Vicky.
No.
But you ask why, and it's just like, we're constantly, especially in the military, we're constantly doing stuff. We're constantly testing leadership concepts, leadership ideas, and I think a lot of them are very valuable to people in management or leadership positions that are finding themselves in places testing their own ideas. And so while there is some military-centric stuff that you wouldn't get unless you speak the lingo, there's a lot of stuff on there too that I think would help people out.
As I downloaded your book, and I thought there are a lot of leadership books that give you tips and tools, and these are the 7 lessons, etc. But I like the flip side of your book, which is pulling the lessons out of you, right? So can you talk a little bit more about the reflection and the exercise and how that came to be?
Yeah, so like if you go back like 2,000 plus years, people in Greece were making pilgrimages to the Oracle of Delphi to know their future. And one of the archways that they walked under actually said the words, know thyself. And then like, if you're even talking like Eastern, the Eastern traditions, Lao Tzu, he had a thing. He said, can I read this? Can I geek out with you for a little bit?
Sure.
Yeah, awesome. So he said, knowing others is intelligence. Knowing yourself is true wisdom. Mastering others is strength. Mastering yourself is true power. So it's this idea that like, yes, it's really great to learn all these leadership concepts and to read different leadership books. But like, unless you're taking the time to unpack the stuff that you've experienced and really knowing yourself, like it's really hard to move forward and to build off of it. So the book is a 30-day guided reflection. And my writing partner and I, Cassie, who she recently retired from the military as well, like we recognize that asking people to reflect, especially people who've never gotten into journaling before, like that's a really heavy undertaking. And there's journals out there like the 365-day journals and stuff like that. I feel like it's a little bit daunting for a lot of folks. So and then it's like, what am I even journaling about? And so this is a 30-day guided reflection that looks at a bunch of different competencies that are required of leaders to do well. And it's 2 questions a day. So it's nothing crazy. It's something, and we recommend, take 10, 15 minutes in the morning, 10, 15 minutes in the evening and dive into one of these questions. Because the other thing we learned too is like, if I asked you to go, if each of us went back right now and said, hey, journal about this interview, we would probably all look at it through our own individual lenses and probably just have like confirmation bias of stuff that we already thought. And so the journal itself breaks down to different aspects of leadership, like written communication, verbal communication, self-control, and really pushing you to look beyond your go-to things that you're always going to write about. And then our hopes afterwards is that, leaders get like, after doing this for 30 days, just keep going with it and continually, get in this daily habit of reflection.
There was a quote that caught me when I was reading through this the other day. And it was, let's see, as author Stephen Pressfield reminds us in a blog post, deep change in our real lives happens not in clamorous action-filled moments, but in quiet pensive beats when the human heart, at the finish of a protracted, often unconscious process of evolution, concludes and cements its transformation, right? I think we're all tested on a day-to-day basis, but that to get that real change, it takes that reflection. And I mean, that sounds like the basis of everything here.
Yeah, there's another quote I came across when we were writing this. I didn't throw in there, but it was that stock car races are lost and won in the pit stop. And so it's this idea of like, just taking a break, taking a breather, and kind of working through things. And I don't know if either of you know who Stephen Pressfield is, but Steve wrote The Legend of Bagger Vance. That's his book. He and he's wrote several popular books in the military. He wrote The War of Art, which was featured as one of Oprah's like top books. And but like he didn't discover, like he went through life just kind of like floating through, bouncing from thing to thing to thing. Like he was, I think at one point he was a migrant like farm worker. And so like eventually, Steve in those quiet moments like found himself and found his true calling, which was yeah, I'm going to be a writer, and I'm going to see this thing through. And so eventually he finally had success at like in his 50s. And so, again, the goal for this book is to get people at a much younger point in their careers to like start taking those experiences apart and reflecting on them.
I think though it's not just a message for leaders or for business people, right? I think it's a message for teenage boys specifically, right? And I'll just tell you that as a young lady or being around young women, we all like write, we talk, we are very expressive, and I don't think boys are encouraged to reflect in this way. And I think it could have a major impact going forward. What have you seen in terms of that male perspective and versus female perspective on this?
Yeah, so I'll just share with you kind of what our careers looked like. When I say our, I'm talking about my co-author Cassie. Cassie and I have we've done really well, and she did really well in her military career. Like I'm doing fairly well in mine. But like the way the military works is like if you do well for a job, you move to the next job, and it's just sometimes you'll get a break of maybe a couple weeks, maybe a month, but in that month you're moving your house, you're moving your family to a completely another state or a completely different country, and so just your mind really isn't focused on, okay, like what did I really learn from that experience. And so what a lot of people have found is that they've just gone through life, from the military standpoint, going from deployment to deployment, from job to job, from state to state, country to country. And they've never really just sat down and been like, what did I learn? And, like one of the things that I kind of equate this to is that like we each have our own sponge, and we have like our own like bucket of like water that's like life lessons. And so as we go through life, military, business, whatever, right? Like we're dipping our sponge into these different experiences. And most of us, because we're just going so fast in life, or we're staying distracted on our smartphones or binge watching Netflix, we're just kind of like holding the sponge over our own bucket, and like whatever drips out, drips out. And then we just move it, dump the sponge back in that bucket, pick the next sponge up, and kind of do the same thing. And so what I found, at least for me, is that reflection is kind of like squeezing that sponge and getting all you can from that experience into your own bucket of knowledge and life lessons.
Mm-hmm.
The book is My Green Notebook, Know Thyself Before Changing Jobs. And we're living in such a strange time right now. I'm sure you've heard of the Great Resignation. And I was recently reading some statistics that 49% of the population that's over the age of 18 actually has written a letter of resignation, thinking that this is the year maybe they're going to quit their jobs. Now, before they would do that, do you think this whole your manual would be helpful for them to make that next step?
Yeah, like and even my friend Kim Scott, who wrote Radical Candor, she was like she looked through the book, and she said like this is the thing that people need before going to the next thing. Because again, like we can quit our jobs, we can walk out, we can go from, I mean, anything. You can go from job to job, relationship to relationship, but like the one thing that you have in common is you. Like, like it doesn't matter. So you can do all the different jobs, you can not work, you can do all the different relationships or not be in one, but like the common denominator in all that is you. So like unless people really get to know themselves, their preferences, which is one of the things you'll learn that people will walk through in this book, are like things that excite them, things that bother them, maybe help them find practices they need to start doing, or even practices they need to stop doing. But all those things are important to get better at the next thing, which is really what this is all about, is having that growth mindset.
Would it also be good for employers who maybe have feeling a disconnect with their team? Would this help them to better, I don't know, have better engagement with their team members?
Yeah, I think so. Because this book is it's all about stories, right? Like when you're reflecting, you're telling the story of what happened. So, for example, like on day 13, we talk about self-control, right? And so the two questions we have is like, one is like, when did I become extremely angry or upset at work? What triggered me? What was the outcome? And so like you start thinking through that yourself, like what was something that like really set me off? And you could start, like, as you start diving into that, you could figure out like, hey, like I have expectations that are being unmet, so like I need to communicate those better. Or another one is like, what is one habit that I found myself having to control to not create conflict in the organization? Like, and we put little examples in there. Like me, like I don't know if you can tell from this interview, but I have a lot of facial expressions. So if I hear something that I don't like for whatever reason, my eyes roll automatically, and that does not always do well in meetings, especially with my boss. And so, just sitting down and realizing, like, okay, like I need to do things to gain better control, or I need to have a team member at work be like, hey, man, like you're doing that thing where you're like, you're sighing every time the boss says something. Thanks for calling me on that. Like I totally missed that. And so it's like it's little things like that a team leader could sit down with their team and just hey, like what are you learning from the experience about yourself, and then everybody having that dialogue, that communication, and kind of coming back together to strengthen the team.
I read that your book is actually on the hot new releases list in Germany and Italy. So you're published in different languages.
No, so we're not published in different languages.
Oh, you're not?
Yeah, like thankfully other countries are a little bit better at being bilingual than we are. But one of the benefits, I said, like over time, is from the Green Notebook has built a following in Europe among our NATO allies. And so when the book came out, I immediately started getting DMs from people like, hey, how can I get this in Greece? How can I get this in Germany? And so thankfully distribution is worldwide on this.
That's awesome.
So what's next with the book? I mean, you've got such a fantastic, asset here, and you're building the blog, and your podcast is rolling. What's the next launching or the next part of what you're working on in your Green Book?
Yeah, I think the thing is like, we kind of talked about this a little bit before the show, which is, like journaling is not something that comes easy for a lot of folks, and especially men. I think a lot of times is we didn't grow up having a diary with a little key and a lock, and so is just getting people in the mindset of writing their thoughts down on paper. So like bringing the concept of from the Green Notebook, the Green Notebook, to a wider audience, like whatever that is. It could be an app on your phone. It could be one of the things that I use is a small 3x5 moleskin notebook that fits in my pocket. And whenever I have an idea, a thought, like I write it down. And I have like a bigger one that I sit down at night and just kind of walk through. Because I'm very, like, my day job is very busy. Like I leave the house at 5 a.m. every morning, and I get home sometimes between 6:30 and 7. So I don't have a lot of time to sit there and like, ponder the universe, in my dear diary. And so, so I'm learning how busy people can journal and still get something out of it, that can not only benefit them, but benefit their family and benefit their teams as well.
Interesting. So as you're jotting notes, would you call that journaling throughout the day, just like an idea occurs to you? And
Yeah, it's actually, it's fascinating. Like, I think I read somewhere that we have between 50 and 100,000 thoughts that just enter our minds every day. And, because, I'm drinking coffee right now, it's probably like 150, 200,000 thoughts. But like they come in and then they go out and then they're forgotten. And, they don't really stick. And I mean, I don't know about y'all, but like, how many times have you had a good idea and then it just completely, you forgot about it?
Exactly.
Right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Or if you're listening to a podcast or an audiobook on the way to work, you're like, oh man, that was genius. I'm going to remember that. You don't remember that as soon as you start fighting through your emails when the day starts. So just this idea of capturing stuff. And I have like 3 or 4, these like small notebooks now that I've just written down passages and like insights I've had, and they've been really beneficial, not only in my writing, but is also just like being a better person, being a more integrated person through this process.
And I find fascinating that you say journaling isn't something new. And I always thought it was kind of maybe an Oprah thing, like she started it. But this is, if you're a fan of the movie Gladiator, that's kind of got a connection, right?
Yeah, so like, let's go back like 2,000 years, and there was a philosophy called Stoicism that is just now making, like, Ryan Holiday and there's a couple other people that are making it more popular. But this original philosophy, one of the tenets of it was to sit down and reflect and write down your day. And there was one guy, Epictetus, and he would say, basically write down your intentions before the day gets started. And he had a series of questions that he would ask himself. And there was another guy named Seneca who would write down, this is what, like he said, before he'd go to bed at night, like he would be completely honest with himself and write down the things that he messed up so he could get better the next day. And so, and Seneca was just like, basically, he was a modern day blogger back in ancient times who was like trying to help people get better. But he was also the writer advisor for Nero. So imagine like having to wrestle with that every day. So that's kind of like what he was going through. But you were talking about Gladiator, and one of the people who caught on to this idea of this is something I should do to be a better person was an emperor named Marcus Aurelius. And like we're like, oh, I'm having a bad day or whatever. Like when Marcus took over the Roman Empire, it was like can I cuss? Am I allowed to cuss on this show?
Sure.
Like, yeah, like the shit hit the fan. Like all of a sudden, famine broke out. The plague was really bad. It was like decimating Rome, like way worse than anything we're seeing with COVID. I think he buried like 8 or 10 of his kids. Like the only one to survive was Commodus, the crazy guy from Gladiator. Like his co-emperor was his stepbrother, and his stepbrother was like a drunken alcoholic. So he could never. So like if it was something bad going on when he was in charge, like when someone was in charge, it happened to Marcus. And so as Marcus was on the front lines, like fighting wars for the empire, he was going back to his tent every night and journaling. And he was saying things like, hey, like, don't become Caesar-fied. Don't become dyed in purple. And what he was saying was, don't let this go to your head. Like, you still have to be a good person. And so like he was fighting with his own ego on a sheet of paper, writing down, these are things that I need to keep doing to remind myself to be the emperor that this empire needs. And we, like, today we celebrate those, like, and they're called the meditations, which I think is a familiar term that people would recognize, the meditations of Marcus Aurelius. And when you read them, I mean, it's just amazing because you put yourself in the mind of this person that's in charge of fighting a war, and the stuff that he is just wrestling with internally, because that book was never meant to be published It wasn't like like some people get out of the military or get out of public service and publish their memoirs. Like that was his diary that he was working through. And so they're very real, very they're very like authentic thoughts. And so it's even there is something that we can all aspire to do the same thing in our own notebooks.
Now, as an entrepreneur that loves leadership, I also find myself saying and repeating these things to my daughter, who's 15, and bringing it home. It's really changed the level of conversation. Do you find yourself at home with your kids and bringing this leadership trait home?
Yeah, so that's like one of the things that like if I was going into the home office and shutting the door, because like we talked about, like this is something I do in my free time. If I was doing that, I would be a terrible husband and terrible father, and this hotel room would probably be my house. Um, but I can't do that, and so I do my best to incorporate my family like in this process. So I'll give you a couple of examples. I interviewed when I was prepping to interview Chris Hadfield. Chris was the first Canadian to ever make it into space. He was in charge of the international space. He commanded the International Space Station. He is Canada's Neil Armstrong. Matter of fact, like him installing Canada's arm onto the International Space Station is on the back of the Canadian $5 bill. And so one of the things that, listening to podcasts and stuff that Chris had gone on, we were driving home from practice one night, and I was sitting in the car with my son, and Chris says, we can always make a bad problem worse. And what he was saying was like basically that, like we can let our emotions get into play. We cannot be prepared. And so I hit pause on it and started talking it through with my son, and just having that conversation with him. Another one that was doing was when I was a kid, I was a huge WCW wrestling fan, and one of my favorite wrestlers, which I don't know if you ever spoke to him, Vicky, was Diamond Dallas Page.
Oh yeah.
And he's a character. And so like at 50, he reinvents himself into a yoga expert, and that's what he's doing now. And anyways, so like my son was trying out for football, and just at the end of the interview, I asked Dallas, I was like, hey, could you talk to my son for a few minutes and just kind of give him some advice? And like the pep talk he gave him was like so motivational that like my eyes were starting to like to well up with tears. And so doing that, Steve Pressfield again, an amazing author. He's been my hero. Him and his girlfriend came and stayed with us this summer, and to have my kids be able to interact with them and learn from somebody like that was just phenomenal. Another example is I interviewed Lawrence Tynes, and Lawrence Tynes was the kicker for the New York Giants, who had to kick the game-winning field goal in double overtime to get the Giants into the 2007 Super Bowl. So talk about pressure, right?
Yeah.
And so Lawrence talked to Brady and one of his friends after an interview about, hey, like this is what you got to do to be great, And so it's not just me doing this for an audience and doing that. Like I'm trying to incorporate this stuff in my family. And so one of the things, last thing, is the my green notebook. Like we sell these in bulk from our house because we can get it out to people a lot cheaper. And so I joke around and say that my 11-year-old and my 4-year-old work in shipping and receiving at the house because they're in there like making boxes and stuff. So it's and then I said last thing, one more thing is that I think the fact that like my kids see me reading and writing all the time, like it's not what we say, it's what we do, are the things that they latch onto. So the fact that they get to see dad, making time out of the day to do these things, getting up early, being disciplined to do these things, I think sets a good example for them as they grow up and grow older.
You're going to have some funny encounters too. I'll just share one with my daughter. When she was 6 or 7, I did an author signing for my book, and I wanted her to be a part of it. So I sat her up next to me at the signing table, right? And everyone just loved that. So they were really more concerned with having her sign than me sign. So there's probably about 7,500 books out there with, Bridget.
That is awesome. That is so cool.
And years later, you think she would have forgotten about it. You think that would, like, you move on, whatever happens. I took her to an author talk, Cheryl Strayed, the author of Wild. She was speaking about Wild, and we were getting ready to actually go on a major hike of our own. We were going to hike the Grand Canyon. And as we're going through the line to have Cheryl Strayed sign the book, she looks at my daughter and she goes, "Have you ever been to an author signing?" And she goes, "Well, yeah, my mom's." Like it was totally plain as day. Like,
Yeah.
that's that experience, right?
Yeah, I keep trying to tell them like, hey, this isn't normal. And then just try to be like, hey, like I've been working for 8 years at this. Like this wasn't something I just started. Like I didn't become like a YouTuber yesterday and pick up a following. Like it was slow growth. It was constantly chipping away at stuff. So I try to communicate that. And like what you said just made me think of Kim Scott. Was like her daughter was sitting at the breakfast table one time and was like, "Mom, I just wish you weren't the radical candor lady." And then, Kim's like, "Oh my God, like, is it because I'm gone all the time? Is it because I'm not devoting enough time to her?" Like, she's like going through all these things. And then she's like, "Wait a minute, why?" And she's like, "Because you keep asking me these questions about what happened at school today." And she's like, "Okay." So like, it's just always funny how that kind of, the intersection of like what we do professionally, how it affects our children.
Definitely.
Before we let you go, 3 tips to becoming a great leader, briefly.
Yeah, I would say is read everything you can get your hands on. Like if you're in business, read something from military, read something from science, read something from history. Like just make your reading varied. 2, reflect. So important. And like write it down. Just spend a couple minutes today writing down your notes from your books or things from your experience. And then 3 is like diversify your network. Like don't just be friends with like men who are in this particular domain of business or women who are just doing this thing. Like have friends. Like Cassie and I are like night and day, but she's like my best friend, and we create like amazing content together because we're able to bring both of our background and our experiences together to do that. So those would be my 3 things.
The book is My Green Notebook, Know Thyself Before Changing Jobs, and it is out there. You can get it. Joe's kids will be sending you your copy. I want to thank you for your service before we let you go, and best of luck to you. We appreciate your time today on PRosé.
Cheers. Thank you so much, Vicki, Cindy. This was awesome.
Thank you.
Join us next week for another edition of PRosé with Vicki Locke and Cindy Woolley from C2 Communications.